During the pre-dawn hours one morning in August of 2018, police in Lincoln, Nebraska responded to what seemed like a routine domestic disturbance between 26-year-old Ivy Moore and her boyfriend, who she claimed was refusing to leave her apartment. Immediately upon arriving at the scene, officers realized that the situation was more serious than they expected it to be. Moore's boyfriend was suffering from a hand injury and there was blood on his shirt. He told the police that he and Moore were arguing about a woman from his past when he started packing his belongings with plans to leave. According to the victim, Moore suddenly swung at him with a 3-foot-long Japanese sword, prompting him to throw his hands up in an attempt to shield his face from the blade. The sword slashed his hand, but his injuries were thankfully non-threatening. Officers noticed that Moore seemed intoxicated. During their conversation at the scene, she was arrested on suspicion of domestic assault and using a weapon to commit a felony. Despite the seriousness of her charges, she flashed a wide open-mouthed grin in her mugshot. But she probably stopped smiling a little while later when the judge set her bail at $7,500. Unfortunately, the story went quiet in the media shortly after news of Moore's arrest first broke, leaving the outcome of the case unclear. Number 21. Kerry Ann Stevens. Over a roughly 2-year period started in 2021, British criminal lawyer Kerry Ann Stevens helped herself to pricey meals at numerous restaurants and fled without paying the bill. She even stole food from unsuspecting delivery drivers by pretending there was a mix-up regarding her payment. In January of 2021, the serial dine and dasher tricked a delivery man into handing over her unpaid meal by insisting she had paid for her order from a kebab shop. When the driver attempted to call the restaurant to confirm whether Stevens had actually paid, she shut her front door in his face. The restaurant told the driver that Stevens had not paid, but she refused to answer the door when he tried getting her to come outside. After knocking for several minutes, the delivery man cut his losses and paid for the £43 meal with his own earnings. Stevens told police that she thought her boyfriend had paid for the food when he ordered it online, but her history of failing to pay her tab suggested otherwise. About a year before the kebab incident, the lawyer and her boyfriend were accused of skipping out on a £60 bill after dining at a restaurant. At the end of the meal, Stevens' boyfriend left the business. She told employees that he had taken her bank card with him and that she had no way to cover the check. Stevens left her passport and phone number with the staff as collateral and promised to return later that night to pay the bill. When she failed to come back to the restaurant, the manager called her and she promised to come by the next morning. Once again, she was a no-show. She tried arranging for the return of her passport by emailing the restaurant support team, but the manager called the police and she was arrested. In 2022, Stevens was convicted of 2 counts of fraud and ordered to pay £1,943 in compensation, along with costs totaling £4,489. Number 20. Ashley Horning. In January of 2019, Zachariah Gardner of Spokane, Washington, discovered that his girlfriend of several weeks, 25-year-old Ashley Horning, was wanted for killing her ex-boyfriend's mother, 48-year-old Christina Powell, who had been shot dead in front of her family just 2 hours earlier. He convinced Horning to turn herself in, and she was charged with murder. Speaking with local station KXLY, Gardner said that Horning was upset because she had lost custody of her 2 children. Their fathers, including Powell's son, had no contact orders of protection against her, further restricting her access to the kids. Gardner described Horning as a good woman, but acknowledged that it might be difficult for people to agree, considering her circumstances at the time. The victim's son, Greg Powell, told police that Horning had showed up at their home saying she wanted to speak with him. He noticed that Horning had a silver revolver in her hand and unfortunately was unable to stop her from using it. Horning later told police that she threw the revolver into the Spokane River. In early 2023, Horning pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. She was sentenced to 14 years in prison, followed by 3 years of probation. Number 19. Malachi Love Robinson. Malachi Love Robinson was just 18 years old when he was accused of practicing medicine without a license. In 2016, going by the name Dr. Love, the young con man ran a phony medical office in West Palm Beach, Florida, called the New Birth, New Life Medical Center. He claimed to specialize in depression, psychosis, substance abuse, and chronic fatigue syndrome, despite not being qualified to treat any medical conditions. Love Robinson's arrest came about a month after he opened the practice. He was promptly taken into custody after giving medical advice to an undercover officer posing as a patient with health concerns while pretending to be a doctor. The young man stole an elderly woman's checkbook and wrote $30,000 worth of fraudulent checks. He also stole $20,000 from a doctor. Love Robinson denied any wrongdoing and vowed to fight the case. But this wasn't the first time he was accused of impersonating a medical professional. In 2017, the teen was seen wandering around a hospital wearing a stethoscope and a lab coat repeatedly over a month-long period. But authorities declined to press charges due to a lack of evidence that an actual crime had taken place. Love Robinson had also previously been accused of practicing massage therapy without a license, but was also never charged in that case. While out on bail following his arrest, he tried buying a Jaguar at a car dealership in Virginia with a stolen credit card. He served a year in a Virginia prison for providing false information, then was extradited to Florida, where he pleaded guilty to practicing medicine without a license, along with multiple fraud and theft charges. Love Robinson was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison, but was paroled in 2019 after serving roughly 20 months. The serial grifter was arrested yet again in 2020 for stealing more than $10,000 from his employer while working as a salesman. He pleaded guilty to grand theft and organized fraud and is currently serving a 26-month prison sentence. Number 18. Hatty Reynolds. In May of 2018, 95-year-old Hatty Reynolds got sick and tired of her 46-year-old granddaughter, Janine Williams, staying in bed all day soaking up the air conditioning at their home in Daytona Beach, Florida. Out of frustration, she took off her slipper and slapped Williams in the face with it, then called the local police department and asked for help. Williams wasn't injured and didn't want to press charges. Reynolds was nevertheless arrested on a misdemeanor domestic violence charge and taken to jail, where she spent the night waiting to see a judge. She was released the next day. Police Chief Craig Capri told the Daytona Beach News-Journal that the state's domestic violence laws required law enforcement to make an arrest. The News-Journal challenged this claim, noting that the law allows responding officers to determine whether an arrest is necessary in domestic violence cases. Furthermore, an experienced defense attorney who was not directly involved with the case told the news outlet that the police could have issued Reynolds a citation or deferred to prosecutors to determine whether charges should be pursued. Within days of the elderly woman's arrest, the state attorney dropped the case and the police department announced that a supervisor would respond to similar incidents in the future to decide whether any arrests should be made. Number 17. Charles Smith. During what began as a routine 2 a.m. traffic stop in early November of 2017, police in South Hackensack, New Jersey came face to face with 66-year-old Santa Claus impersonator Charles Smith, whose costume could be seen hanging in his car. Officers noticed a crack pipe in plain view, giving them probable cause to search the vehicle. In addition to the pipe, they found hypodermic needles and empty bags of suspected heroin and crack cocaine. Smith was arrested on 2 counts of possession of drug paraphernalia and 1 count of possession of hypodermic needles. After being processed, he was released with instructions to return to court at a later date. The Santa Claus lookalike was a retired New Jersey Transit employee who volunteered for Toys for Tots every year during the Christmas season. A reporter for USA Today affiliate NorthJersey.com was unable to reach a representative of the non-profit for comment, and calls to a phone number listed under Smith's name went unanswered. Number 16. Margot Tocci. In July of 2012, 20-year-old Margot Tocci persuaded her 19-year-old ex-boyfriend Robert Solis to join her for a ride in her new car. During the drive, she stopped at a school in Edison, New Jersey, and insisted on going for a nighttime walk together. As soon as he exited the vehicle, Solid was ambushed by 3 men. The male suspects were later identified as Tocci's new boyfriend, 21-year-old Daniel Shorpees, who was accused of masterminding the attack, 25-year-old Samir Salah, and 20-year-old Jesse Moscatello. According to police, the assailants beat Solis with a bat and a pipe, smashed his cell phone, and stole his watch, while Tocci watched. The perpetrators then fled the scene, leaving Tocci's ex alone and bleeding on the ground. Solis went to a nearby house for help and was taken to the hospital, where he received stitches for a head wound. Police arrested Tocci and Shorpees hours later. A few days after that, Samir Salah implicated himself in the crime by bragging about it in front of an off-duty police officer, while Jesse Moscatello lawyered up and turned himself in after learning that there was a warrant for his arrest. Tocci flashed an ear-to-ear grin in her mugshot, but her co-conspirators seemed far less thrilled in theirs. The young woman pleaded guilty to a conspiracy charge and served a year behind bars. Salah pleaded guilty to a conspiracy charge and received a 4-year prison sentence, while Moscatello was sentenced to a year of probation for his role in the crime. Shorpees was sentenced to 4 years in prison for theft by unlawful taking, but was paroled after serving 15 months. Number 15. Shalaya Briston. During what appeared to be a domestic dispute gone terribly wrong in December of 2019, 24-year-old Shalaya Briston was accused of stabbing her boyfriend, 30-year-old NFL wide receiver Jerel Milton, in their apartment in downtown Pittsburgh. Police responded to the scene after receiving calls about a large amount of blood in the building's elevator. According to witnesses, the couple were entangled in a physical struggle in their kitchen when Briston grabbed an object and stabbed Pryor twice with it. Briston then drove Pryor to a nearby hospital where he was treated for critical injuries. Thankfully, he survived. At the time, the couple had been dating for about a year. Their relationship was extremely volatile, according to those who knew the pair, with one source telling TMZ that Pryor was always putting his hands on Briston. On the night of the alleged stabbing, a witness told police that Pryor started the fight by slamming Briston onto the floor in their apartment building hallway when she returned home from a night out clubbing. Both parties were charged with simple assault, and Briston faced additional charges of attempted homicide and aggravated assault. Despite the serious nature of the charges, she smiled in her mugshot. She was given a real reason to smile in February of 2020 when the judge overseeing the case dropped the attempted murder charge. Later that year, Briston pleaded guilty to simple assault and was sentenced to 2 years of probation. Pryor pleaded guilty to harassment and faced a 90-day probation sentence, but he was arrested again in October of 21 for allegedly assaulting Briston after a night out drinking. According to court documents, the fight began after Pryor went home while Briston stayed out for a nightcap. By the time Briston returned to the apartment, Pryor had sent her at least 30 text messages and had tried to call her over 50 times with no answer. He was accused of shoving and slapping Briston, then throwing pumpkins at her car, damaging her windshield. Pryor initially denied charges of simple assault, harassment, and criminal mischief, but he eventually took a deal that was offered to him after he attended anger management and counseling. He pleaded guilty to criminal mischief in exchange for the other 2 charges being dropped and was fined $300. Number 14. Saleha Saeed. Saleha Saeed was just 18 years old when she seized control of Britain's Fat Boy gang from her ex-boyfriend. After ousting her former partner from his position of leadership, she employed her new lover, 21-year-old Nathan Sai, who safeguarded the gang's drug stash. Another high-ranking member, 20-year-old Tremaine Indikumana, manned the organization's phone line. The gang imported large amounts of heroin and crack cocaine from London into the seaside town of Great Yarmouth in Norfolk. In addition to distributing drugs, Saeed recruited young people into the gang and was involved in human trafficking. She looks harmless in her mugshot, but she ruled the operation with an iron fist, stating in one text message to the man she seized leadership from, "You're deluding yourself that the line is yours when it is truly mine." But her power was short-lived, coming to an abrupt end when police busted the gang in 2022. Sai and Indikumana each pleaded guilty to 2 counts of supplying Class A drugs and received prison sentences ranging from 3 to 4 years. Saeed admitted that she held a high-ranking position in the gang, but denied being its leader. She also claimed that older people had recruited her into the gang at a young age, and that she too was a victim, but she eventually took responsibility for her actions, and in 2024 she pleaded guilty to 2 drug-related crimes, and 1 count of arranging or facilitating the travel of another person with a view to exploitation. The judge sentenced her to 5 years in a young offenders facility. Number 13. Jerel Milton. 31-year-old Jamie Mel Ray was shot dead in a public park in Omaha, Nebraska late one afternoon in June of 2015. Another man, 30-year-old Charles Fisher, was shot multiple times and survived his injuries. 2 out of 3 teenage suspects, Jamar Milton and Shantavius Primes Willis, were arrested on suspicion of first-degree murder and detained without bail shortly after the shooting. The third suspect, Jerel Milton, was still on the run a week later, prompting law enforcement to release his mugshot in hopes of receiving tips on his whereabouts. People were shocked by his extremely childlike appearance, which served as a reminder of his young age. Jerel was finally captured several weeks later in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He was charged with first-degree murder and held without bond. Prosecutors classified the incident as a gang-related drug deal gone wrong, claiming that the victims had gone to the park to sell marijuana to the suspects. According to law enforcement, all 3 of the accused killers were carrying weapons at the time of the shooting. Because of his age, Jerel Milton faced lighter consequences than his co-conspirators, who were tried and convicted as adults. He was put on indefinite probation for his role in the crime and was placed in a youth home where his problematic behavior continued. Milton repeatedly ran away, and his probation was revoked in 2017, 2018, and 2019. In 2020, he was accused of brutally assaulting a woman. This time, he was charged as an adult. In 2023, Milton was charged with assault for allegedly running a man over with his car. His repeated arrests have prompted outcries throughout Nebraska for changes in the juvenile justice system, which has clearly failed to rehabilitate Milton. Records show that the 21-year-old is currently serving a 15-year prison sentence for assault, using a deadly weapon in the commission of a felony, and methamphetamine possession. He'll become eligible for parole in 2030. Number 12. Cody Gann and Jasmine Carey. A family's lives were turned upside down on Thanksgiving Day in 2017 when a young girl named Delilah Hernandez was fatally gunned down inside her San Antonio, Texas home. She was in her bedroom when someone opened fire on the residence from outside with a high-powered assault weapon. Hernandez was shot in the chest and rushed to the emergency room where she died from her injuries. Police were unable to identify the suspects based on surveillance footage of their vehicle. Hernandez's brother was sleeping at the time of the shooting, but he was quick to tell investigators that he believed 18-year-old Cody Gann was involved and that the crime was most likely carried out in retaliation for previous drive-by shootings. Police arrested Gann and his accused co-conspirator, 19-year-old Jasmine Carey, who had dated Hernandez's brother in the past. Carey agreed to testify against Gann in exchange for leniency and received a 25-year sentence for her role in the murder. Gann was found guilty by a jury and was sentenced to 40 years behind bars. Both he and Carey are required to serve at least half their sentences before they'll become eligible for parole. Number 11. Jeffrey Ferguson. In August of 2023, 911 dispatchers in Orange County, California, received a call from the adult son of Superior Court Judge Jeffrey Ferguson, who said that his 72-year-old father had just shot his mother, 65-year-old Jerel Ferguson, during a drunken argument. During that same time period, the judge himself dialed 911 but hesitated to admit that he had shot Jerel. Responding deputies found Jerel dead from a gunshot wound at her and Jeffrey's home in Anaheim. The couple's son told police that the back-and-forth bickering between the pair began while the three of them were out to dinner. He claimed that his father made a shooting motion with his hand while the family was still in the restaurant. According to prosecutors, as soon as the family arrived home, Ferguson removed his gun from his angle holster and shot Jerel in the chest. Around the same time, he called 911. He reportedly admitted to the crime in a series of apologetic text messages to some of his colleagues, including the court clerk and bailiff, stating that he had just lost it and that he wouldn't be at work the next day because he would be in custody. According to police reports, Ferguson smelled like alcohol and told responding officers that he couldn't believe what he had just done. More than 47 legally owned weapons and over 26,000 rounds of ammunition were removed from the home. The community was shocked by news of the jovial-looking judge's arrest. In addition to murder, Ferguson faces 2 gun-related counts, including the personal discharge of a firearm causing great bodily injury or death. He's free on $1 million bail pending the outcome of the case. In a statement, Ferguson's attorneys described the tragedy as an accident and nothing more. The outcome of the case remains to be seen. Number 10. Skylar Ocean Rohrer. 18-year-old Skylar Ocean Rohrer didn't have much to smile about when she was arrested in Davis County, Utah, on nearly 24 charges. In November of 2018, she nevertheless smiled in her mugshot as she was being booked into custody on 20 counts of possession or transfer of a financial card transaction and 2 counts of burglary of a vehicle. Rohrer's arrest came after police responded to reports of 3 people looking inside a vehicle. Officers spotted the young woman, who matched the description of one of the suspects, walking near the scene of the suspicious activity. According to law enforcement, Rohrer acted evasive and didn't want to answer questions about what she was doing in the area. During a search of Rohrer's backpack, officers found 20 financial cards, a checkbook, and 2 driver's licenses that did not belong to her. The police were unable to establish any valid reason for her to have the items in her possession, prompting their decision to take her into custody. The outcome of the case is unclear. Number 9. Kristen Gilbert. With a loving husband, 2 kids, attractive looks, a well-paying job as a registered nurse, and a home in suburban Massachusetts, Kristen Gilbert seemed like a typical suburban soccer mom who had achieved the American dream. In 1989, she began working at the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Northampton, where she was initially well liked by her superiors. Gilbert's co-workers noticed that a lot of patients died during her shifts and jokingly called her the Angel of Death. They didn't really think that she was killing patients at first, but people kept dying, and Gilbert's fellow VA employees became increasingly suspicious over time. In 1996, several nurses reported their concerns amid an alarming spike in cardiac arrests at the hospital. At the same time, staff members noticed that the hospital's supply of the heart stimulant epinephrine was unusually low, leading to suspicions that Gilbert was purposely overdosing patients. An investigation was launched, and Gilbert quit her job. She also called in a bomb threat to the hospital in an attempt to derail the investigation, but her efforts were futile. Gilbert was convicted of the bomb threat in 1998, but it soon became the least of her worries. Nobody will ever know exactly how many patients she murdered, but federal authorities charged her in the death of 4 veterans: Henry Houdon, Kenneth Cuttin, Edward Squire, and Stanley Jagodowski. One expert speculated that Gilbert overdosed patients to create emergencies that she could respond to in her efforts to impress a security guard she was having an extramarital affair with. Other evidence suggested that she acted in a more calculated and deliberate manner, possibly out of an enjoyment of watching patients die. Gilbert's reasons for her actions may never be known. During her trial, the court learned that Gilbert had an extensive psychiatric history. She had been hospitalized numerous times throughout her life and had also fallen under suspicion of harming patients at past jobs. In 2001, a jury convicted Gilbert on 3 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of second-degree murder, and 2 counts of attempted murder. Prosecutors argued for the death penalty, but she was sentenced to 4 consecutive life terms, plus 20 years, without the possibility of parole. Number 8. William Leslie Arnold. William Leslie Arnold was just a teenager when he shot his parents in 1958 because they refused to let him borrow their car for a movie date with his girlfriend. He buried their bodies in the backyard of the family's Nebraska home and told people that his mom and dad were on vacation. Arnold confessed to the double murder 2 weeks later, following the discovery of the crime. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life in prison. During his time behind bars, Arnold proved to be a model inmate. In 1967, nearly a decade into his sentence, he and another inmate, John Harding, escaped from prison. Harding was quickly captured, but Arnold's whereabouts remained a mystery for more than a half-century. Federal authorities never gave up on finding him, and in 2023, investigators with the U.S. Marshals Service tracked him to a cemetery in Queensland, Australia, where he was buried beneath a tombstone bearing the name John Vincent Damon. During his first 3 months on the run, Arnold married a woman who had no idea he was a wanted fugitive. They had children together and spent the next decade living in Chicago, Miami, and California. The couple eventually split, and in 1978, Arnold moved to Australia, where he worked as a used car salesman. He married again and had more kids, with his new family unaware of his criminal past. Needless to say, Arnold's families in both the US and Australia were shocked to learn that the man they knew as John Damon was a convicted double murderer who had escaped from prison and spent the majority of his life on the run from the law. Family members described him as a great father, a devoted family man, and a successful businessman who lived a respectable lifestyle. The case was solved thanks to US Deputy Marshal Matt Westover, who spent copious amounts of free time poring over years' worth of documents, clues, and leads. Speaking with the New York Times in 2023, he said that he considered it a good thing that Arnold had passed away because it spared his already stunned family from the additional pain that would come with an arrest and imprisonment. Number 7. James Lee Byrd. Late one afternoon in January of 2018, police responded to a reported shooting at a home in Columbus, Georgia, where they found 67-year-old Nancy Long Green dead on the kitchen floor with a gunshot wound. The house belonged to her stepfather, 88-year-old James Lee Byrd, who Green had gone to check on after missing a call from him. In addition to being Byrd's stepdaughter, Green was his primary caretaker. According to investigators, Byrd believed that Green and a relative in Alabama were trying to steal nearly $200,000 of his money. After murdering Green, Byrd called the other relative, confessed to the crime, and said, "Come get you some." It's unclear whether there was any truth to Byrd's suspicions. Byrd pleaded not guilty to murder and possession of a firearm during the commission of a crime. He was held without bond at the Muskogee County Jail, during which time his health began to decline rapidly. By the time Byrd was transferred to a secure nursing facility for elderly and ailing inmates with mental health issues, he had become incontinent and was no longer able to get out of bed on his own. He died in May of 2019 before his case could go to trial. Number 6. Lorenzo Ramirez. In early April of 2024, a garbage collector discovered the murdered body of a 58-year-old woman named Erica Fernandez along a wealthy street in the Chilean capital of Santiago. She was dressed in a nun's habit, and based on the level of decomposition to her remains, it was clear that she had been dead for a long time before the luggage containing her body was left on the roadside. Investigators initially theorized that Fernandez was killed in a gang-related murder, but surveillance footage suggested otherwise. In the video, an 80-year-old woman wearing the same type of habit as the murdered woman could be seen rolling a suitcase containing the victim's body down the sidewalk. Identified by police as Lorena Ramirez, the octogenarian told detectives that she and Fernandez had made a pact to take care of one another after death and to not report one another's death to the authorities. Ramirez revealed that Fernandez had died from natural causes a year earlier in April 2023, and that she had kept the woman's body in a suitcase in her cellar because of the love she had for her friend. According to police, neither of the women formally belonged to a monastic order, but were living a cloistered lifestyle as consecrated laywomen. A police spokesperson told the news outlet El País that investigators believe Ramirez dumped Fernandez's body because she feared that her daughter would discover the corpse during a visit from Italy. In the words of prosecutor Francisco Lanas, "It's the only logical explanation we have so far in this ongoing investigation." An autopsy found no signs of foul play, indicating that Ramirez might actually be telling the truth. She could be charged with concealing human remains, which is a violation of health code laws, but it's unclear whether prosecutors plan to move forward with the case against her. The investigation is ongoing. Number 5. Shelley Notek. Michelle Shelley Notek and her husband, David, seemed like an average American couple. They shared their home in rural Raymond, Washington, with their 3 young daughters, and were known for taking in boarders who were down on their luck. It seemed like a generous gesture, but in the mid-90s their house guests began to disappear. The first person to vanish was Shelley's longtime friend, 36-year-old Kathy Loreno, who moved in after losing her job as a hairdresser. When Loreno's estranged family reported her missing in 1994, Shelley claimed that the troubled woman had run off to California with a truck driver. Shelley Knotek's teenage nephew, Shane Watson, was the next household member to disappear. He had been living with the Knoteks for 6 years because his own parents were unable to care for him. The Knoteks told anyone who asked that Shane had moved to Alaska to work on a fishing boat. Nearly a decade later, in 2003, 57-year-old Ronald Woodworth went missing from the Knotek household. As a gay military veteran who struggled with addiction, Woodworth was particularly vulnerable and in need of a helping hand. When he vanished after living with the Knoteks for over 2 years, Shelley told his friends that he had moved away for a job. Shortly after Woodworth's disappearance, the Knotek's daughters went to the police with a horror story about what really went on inside the residence. For years, Shelley had brutally abused and tortured her boarders and her own children. Kathy Loreno endured forced labor, routine beatings, starvation, and other cruel treatment, causing her to lose 100 pounds and nearly all of her teeth. During questioning, David Knotek told investigators that he found Loreno choking on her own vomit on the basement floor where Shelley forced her to sleep. He tried to clear Loreno's airway and revive her, but it was too late. David burned her and scattered the ashes. He also confessed to shooting Shane Watson after Shelley discovered that the teenager was secretly collecting photos of the abuse with plans to go to law enforcement. His body was also burned. While searching the property, police found Woodworth's body buried in the backyard. He had died after suffering years of agonizing torment, including being forced to jump off the second-story roof barefoot onto the gravel-covered ground below. Shelley had forced Woodworth to drink his own urine, banned him from using the indoor restroom, and had burned his feet and poured bleach into the wounds. David Knotek took a plea deal and served 13 years of a 15-year prison sentence for second-degree murder before being paroled in 2016. Shelley pleaded guilty to reduced murder and manslaughter charges, resulting in a 22-year sentence. She was released from prison at the age of 68 in 2022 after serving 18 years. Number 4. Arthur Schirmer. Arthur Burton Schirmer was a charismatic pastor who drew a sizable following of parishioners at the Readers United Methodist Church in western Pennsylvania's Pocono Mountains. He lived next door to the church in Jackson Township with his second wife, Betty Jean Schirmer, who died in 2008 in what appeared to be a tragic car wreck. Betty's death was initially ruled accidental, but authorities reopened the investigation after discovering that Arthur was having an affair with his married assistant. Investigators soon realized that Betty Jean's fatal injuries were inconsistent with a car crash and that she had been bludgeoned to death. They discovered a large amount of Betty Jean's blood in the Schirmer's garage, and evidence that someone had tried to clean it up, proving that her wounds were not caused by an automobile accident. Armed with the new evidence, prosecutors charged Arthur with killing Betty Jean. In 2013, he was found guilty of first-degree murder, which carries a mandatory sentence of life without parole in Pennsylvania. The case caused examiners to re-examine the death of Arthur's first wife, Jewel, who had passed away at the age of 50 in 1999, nearly a decade before Betty Jean's murder. Arthur claimed that he found his wife of 30 years unresponsive at the bottom of their basement stairs with a vacuum cleaner cord wrapped around her ankle. He managed to convince the authorities that Jewel had tripped on the cord, fallen down the stairs, and hit her head in a freak accident. Arthur was charged with Jewel's murder and pleaded guilty to a reduced third-degree murder charge. He was sentenced to 20 to 40 years in prison, which will run consecutively to his current life sentence, further ensuring that he'll remain behind bars until his dying day. Number 3. Edgardo Greco. Based in Italy's Calabria region, the 'Ndrangheta Mafia is one of the world's most powerful gangs, with far-reaching connections spanning the globe. But maintaining an upper hand against other criminal organizations often comes at the expense of brutal warfare with other gangs. The early 90s were a particularly violent period for the 'Ndrangheta and other Italian mobs, with high-ranking leaders employing the services of their most ruthless hitmen. One such individual was 'Ndrangheta member Edgardo Greco, who bludgeoned rival gangsters Stefano and Giuseppe Bartolomeo to death with a metal bar inside a fish shop in 1991. Greco buried the brothers, then dug up their bodies 3 years later and dissolved the remains in acid in an attempt to cover up the double murder. When a warrant was finally issued for Greco's arrest in 2006, he went on the run. Prosecutors moved forward with the trial despite being unable to locate the wanted fugitive, who was convicted of the murders in absentia and sentenced to life in prison. Greco's whereabouts remained a mystery until July of 2021, when he was featured in a French newspaper as a pizza chef named Paolo Rocco Demetrio. The article showcased his homemade recipes, which were inspired by his Calabrian grandmother's cooking and contained photos of Greco grinning from ear to ear as he showed off his cuisine. It also mentioned the town he was living in Saint-Étienne, and the restaurant where he worked. Greco had been living in France under his Demetrio alias since 2014. He was well known among locals for his culinary creations, but maintained a low enough profile to go unnoticed by the authorities until the magazine article was published. The former mobster, who's now in his 60s, was finally apprehended in 2023 after nearly 18 years on the run. He's been fighting extradition since his capture, and in early 2024, France's top court annulled a lower court's decision to extradite him to Italy. The future of the case remains uncertain. Today's topic was inspired by River Parish. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Louise Bugby. While searching a known drug user's phone in late 2022, police in Moncton, Wales, discovered that the individual was getting their supply from a supermarket worker and mother of 4 during her shifts at a local Tesco store. Text messages revealed that 43-year-old Louise Bugby was selling the drugs while managing the store's cafe. Officers visited Bugby's workplace and found 0.38 grams of cocaine in her possession. During a search of her home, police seized nearly 6 grams of cocaine, valued at around $900. Bugby claimed that she had absorbed a drug debt from her ex-husband, who was serving prison time, but she failed to convince the authorities of her innocence. There was no evidence to indicate that her ex-husband even owed anyone drug money in the first place, or that Bugby was being forced to pay an illicit debt on his behalf. After initially maintaining her innocence, Bugby admitted to selling cocaine over a 3-month period and pleaded guilty to 2 drug charges. The judge imposed a 2-year suspended sentence, sparing her from any prison time, and ordered her to attend rehab and perform community service. Number 1. Margarita Maria Vincente de Azevedo Bonetti. In the upscale Sao Paulo neighborhood of Higienópolis, there's an eerie, overgrown, crumbling mansion that looks out of place among the well-kept neighboring homes. It's home to a woman named Margarita Maria Vincente de Azevedo Bonetti, who lives in isolation and is often seen through the windows with a strange white ointment covering her face. At first glance, it would be natural for someone to assume she's a destitute squatter, but she's actually a wealthy heiress who fled to the decrepit residence after fleeing the United States as a wanted fugitive. Margarita and her husband, René Bonetti, were both born and raised in Brazil. After marrying in the 1970s, they moved to the Washington, D.C. area and brought a maid with them. The couple enslaved the maid for decades, subjecting her to cruel abuse and forcing her to work for free. After 20 years of being trapped inside the Bonetti's home, the maid finally escaped in the early 2000s with help from a neighbor. Before the authorities could arrest her, Margarita fled to Brazil, which does not extradite its citizens to the United States, and took up residence at her family's long-abandoned mansion. Her husband, René, was a U.S. citizen, which meant that American authorities could make a case to extradite him from Brazil if he tried fleeing. He stayed in the US and went to court for his crimes, which landed him a 6-year prison sentence. Margarita is now in her 70s and continues to live in squalor, even though she could afford to fix up the home or move somewhere nicer. She's known for her seemingly spontaneous outbursts and other bizarre behavior, but very little is actually known about the mysterious woman who has spent the last quarter of a century hiding in plain sight under the safety of Brazil's anti-extradition policy. During a rare interview with journalist Chico Felitti, the senior citizen accused the FBI of creating a fictional character completely unlike who she is in real life. Margarita, who is white, also denied harming her maid, who was a poor woman of color. The eccentric heiress is unwelcome in some parts of Brazil due to the allegations which speak to long-running problems in the country revolving around forced labor and racism. Even after reviewing all the available documents on Margarita's case, journalists are left with more questions than answers about her past. In the meantime, there are growing concerns over her ailing mental health, but for now she remains firmly planted in her ramshackle residence with no apparent plans to leave. Thanks for watching. Would you rather be in a relationship with someone who is successful but manipulative, or with someone who is extremely lazy? Let us know in the comments section below.